Some silences merely make people uneasy. And then there is another kind of silence, heavy as stone, deep as an abyss, cold enough to pass straight through the flesh and bone, a silence that exists only in the northern forests in the dead center of winter. In this vast land where pine forests stretch endlessly toward the horizon, winter is not simply a season, it is an ancient being, a force with its own will arriving to erase every remaining trace of warmth from the world. When snow seals the ground beneath an infinite layer of white, the landscape begins to lose its familiar shape. The sun becomes little more than a dim bulb behind dense gray clouds. The trees stand in long blackened rows, like the fossilized ribs of a god that died in a primordial age. Here sound itself seems to be consumed. The smallest noises, a dry leaf falling, the wind slipping through a crack in stone, are swallowed whole by the deep snow. Eventually, you can no longer tell whether you are hearing silence or whether it has completely wrapped itself around you. It closes in like a frozen cloak, tightening slowly, steadily, until thought itself begins to move more slowly, as if freezing in place. And within that prolonged silence, something else begins to grow. Hunger. At first it is familiar, the hollow ache anyone understands after missing a meal. But over time, it becomes something else entirely. It slips between the ribs. It claws outward from the inside, until it is no longer clear whether it is the stomach speaking or the soul being worn thin. Those who have truly endured a northern winter say there comes a moment, no one knows, which day or after which storm, when the body forgets the smell of hunted meat, forgets the sweetness of summer berries, and only one sensation remains. A black, hollow opening in the center of the chest, wide enough to swallow the gray sky above. When hunger becomes a shadow over the mind, ideas of kinship, morality, even human law begin to feel like luxuries, like old stories once told beside a fire, beautiful but distant. Relics from a warmer world that no longer exists. And in the long cold, a question quietly takes shape. Is humanity nothing more than a fragile flame? One that can be snuffed out the moment the winter wind grows strong enough. The Cree elders believed that on the coldest nights, when the world dissolves into white and gray, when it is impossible to tell whether the sun has risen or set, when human awareness blurs like the winter horizon, there comes what they called the white night, a night when sky and earth reflect one another so completely that there is no longer an up or a down. During the white night, a person who strays too far from the camp may never return, not because of a storm or a predator, but because they lose themselves. The Cree say that the spirits of those who died in winter wander during the white night, calling the names of the living. Their voices are gentle, familiar. They invite loved ones to step beyond the circle of fire and follow them into the forest, where they will vanish forever. There is an old story of a young hunter who once left camp during a snowstorm to track a caribou herd. He was strong, enduring, unafraid of winter, but that night the storm rose without warning. The wind screamed so violently that he could no longer hear his own heartbeat, and within that white chaos, he heard a voice. It was his brother's voice, his brother who had died the previous winter. The voice was close, warm. It called his name and promised fire ahead, fresh meat, shelter from the cold. The hunter knew somewhere deep within himself that it could not be real, but hunger and cold numb reason. He followed the sound. The next morning, his body was found only a few hundred steps from the camp, frozen solid, his face turned toward the forest, as if he were still listening for something just beyond reach. The Cree believe that in moments like these, the forest itself becomes alive, and that what waits behind the calling voice is not truly the spirit of the dead, but something far older, something patient, ancient, and watchful. Those who survive the winter sometimes claim they have seen a figure standing in the open spaces between the trees, unnaturally tall, taller than the young pines, thin as dead branches, perfectly still like a statue carved from ice. No one dares approach, and no one can say whether what they saw was real or an illusion born of desperation. but all of them agree on one thing: the figure has no eyes. Or if it does, they are nothing more than dark, empty hollows staring back at the traveler like a wordless warning. In the northern forest, silence is not merely the absence of sound, it is an entity. It waits, it watches, and in its watching, it asks a question very few are willing to answer. When the cold consumes everything, when hunger overwhelms reason, when life and death are separated by a single breath, how much of the human remains? If the northern forest could speak, its voice would never be a single sound. It would be a convergence of thousands of unseen breaths, the wind threading through the treetops, the deep cracking of ice beneath frozen lakes, the footfalls of animals, and the slow, silent movements of spirits that no longer possess form. To the Algonquian peoples, this world was never a mute mass of matter. It lives, it remembers, and it watches humanity with the cold patience of beings that existed long before the first human footprint pressed into the snow. In their worldview, there is no clear boundary between the natural and the supernatural. Every pine tree, every stream, every moss-covered stone carries a spirit, a will of its own. These spirits are not always gentle. They can grant life, but they can also take everything away, with a single winter stretched just a few weeks too long. Humans within this order are not masters. They are only small members of a vast family that includes the other than human. To survive, one must learn to listen, to bow to laws not written in words, but carved into collective memory through stories told and retold across generations. The most sacred of these laws is balance. You may hunt, but only enough to live. You may gather, but you must leave something for the seasons yet to come. Every animal taken must be thanked. Every bone discarded carries a silent apology. Greed in this world is not merely a moral failing, it is a dangerous act, an offense against the unseen order that allows spring to return after winter. The Algonquian believed that when a person begins to take more than they need, the spirits of the forest remember that face. And when the cold grows harsh, that memory returns to collect its debt. There is an old story the elders tell on nights when the wind howls about a place called the Speaking Lake. It is a deep lake hidden within the forest. Its surface so still it reflects the sky, like a black mirror. For many winters, the lake sustained an entire village. Fish were always plentiful. Nets always came up heavy. But over time, some began to fish not from hunger, but from hoarding. They hid dried fish in hollow trees. They buried meat beneath the snow. They took more than their share, while others were forced to divide each meal. One night, as a man cast his net into the water, the lake began to tremble. From its depths came a low, deliberate voice, as if pulled up through ice and stone. Have you taken enough to live or enough to be empty? By morning, the man was found frozen on the shore, his mouth open as if caught mid-scream. From that day on, the lake gave no more fish. Its surface remained calm, but those who approached said they could hear whispers rising from below, reminding them of the price of greed. Guarding these laws, according to legend, is a presence the Algonquian call the Keeper of the Dark. No one knows its true form because those who have seen it can never fully describe it. Some say it appears as a towering figure draped in black animal skins, its face hidden in shadow. Others claim they saw only an unnaturally long shadow sliding through the forest, even when there was no sun. The Keeper of the Dark does not hunt the starving, nor does it harm the lost. It appears only when balance is broken, when someone takes too much, when a leader hoards the best for himself, when one family survives by letting others starve. Stories say that those marked by the Keeper begin to hear footsteps behind them whenever they walk alone in the snow. By the following winter, they vanish, leaving only tracks that lead deep into the forest, where no one dares follow. Beyond the stories of lakes and shadows lies an even older myth, the story of the first winter. The Algonquian believed that in the beginning, the world knew only two seasons, warm and cool. But as humans forgot gratitude, as they took more, killed more, and stored more than necessary, the ancient spirits of sky and earth gathered. From their collective fury, A new spirit was born, the spirit of the blizzard. It carried a cold so deep it could freeze voices and memory alike, and it was released into the world as a warning. The first winter lasted so long that entire tribes nearly vanished. From that time on, people understood that cold does not kill only with ice, but by stripping away the weakest parts of the soul. It was within this spiritual landscape, a world where every action echoed, where greed was seen as a sickness, and where winter possessed a will of its own, that another fear began to take shape. A fear that did not come from outside but from within. When balance is shattered completely, when hunger is no longer held in check by community, when a person no longer sees the world as family but as something to be consumed, the Algonquian believed a different path opens. A path that does not lead immediately to death, but to a slow, cold transformation from which there is no return. That path is not named lightly, for they believe that to speak its name in the heart of winter is to deepen the cold and to alert something in the forest that is always listening. In the world of the Algonquian peoples, there are many unseen laws, but only one that is never debated. It requires no explanation, no justification, and allows no exception. This law is older than the stories of the first winter, older than the memory of long migrations following the herds. It is an absolute prohibition: never consume human flesh under any circumstances. To outsiders, this rule may appear to be a simple moral principle, a line drawn to prevent humanity from descending into savagery. But to the Algonquian, its meaning runs far deeper. To eat another human is not merely to end a life. It is to shatter the sacred order that holds the world together. In their understanding, humans are not prey. Humans are kin. They belong to the same circle of spirits, bound together by invisible ties. When one person consumes another, they do not simply eat a body. They tear that bond apart, turning the world from a family into a hunting ground. For this reason, the Algonquian believed that death by starvation, no matter how cruel, was still less terrifying than survival achieved by crossing this line. Death ends suffering. The violation does not. It leaves behind something enduring and unseen, like a fracture in the soul. A person who breaks the highest taboo does not simply die as a human. They continue to exist, but in another state, trapped between life and death, between humanity and something no longer of this world. The elders say that the first sign is not madness nor physical transformation. It arrives quietly, almost imperceptibly. After the act, the transgressor begins to feel colder than before, even when seated close to the fire. Hunger does not fade. It sharpens. It deepens as though what was consumed never reached the place that truly needed to be filled. Dreams begin to change. No longer visions of animals or hunts, but empty forests, soundless footsteps, and the constant sensation of being watched even while awake. This is the moment when the soul begins to drift from the path of humanity, and another road, cold and irreversible, opens ahead. In the oral traditions, no human punishment is described for those who break this law. The judgment comes from the spirit world itself. And among the most feared of these stories, told only after children have fallen asleep, is the legend of the Winter Mother. The story tells of an unnaturally long winter when snow buried every path and the animals vanished. A woman and her small child became trapped in an isolated lodge deep in the forest. Day after day, their food dwindled. The child cried from hunger, the thin sound cutting through the night like a blade. When the last of the food was gone, the woman began to hear whispers carried by the wind. The voice was gentle, but not human. It told her that the child's life could prolong her own. In a moment where instinct overwhelmed humanity, the mother committed the unforgivable act. No one knows exactly what happened inside that lodge. Only that when spring arrived, searchers found it empty. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, only a strange, unnatural cold lingering in the air. From that time on, during heavy snowfall, people say a white figure can be seen moving among the ice, thin, gaunt, hair hanging loose. It hums a soft lullaby. Children who hear the song become entranced, stepping outside their lodges, without awareness, following the white shape into the forest. The Cree believe this is no longer the woman who was once a mother, but a spirit claimed by winter itself, forever wandering in search of something to fill the void she created. She does not hunt like an animal. She lures, and each lullaby is a reminder that some acts leave no path back to being human. Another legend, even older, tells of two hunters lost in a blizzard while tracking moose. They took shelter in a narrow rock crevice, sharing the last of their dried food. On the third day, one of them died from cold and hunger. The other remained beside the body, waiting for death to claim him as well. But during the night, as wind howled through the stone, he heard a whisper coming from the frozen corpse. The voice did not beg. It did not accuse. It simply said that life could continue, that death did not have to take both of them. The hunter tried to cover his ears, but hunger and cold weakened his will. By morning, searchers found signs that one man had left the crevice. His unsteady footprints led deep into the forest. He was never seen again. Years later, people claimed they sometimes saw a tall, thin figure, standing in blizzards, mouth open, as if whispering to an invisible body held in its arms. These stories were never meant to frighten children. They are warnings sharpened across generations about the final boundary humanity must not cross. In Algonquian belief, the moment a person begins to see another human as food, a terrible inversion occurs. The human soul becomes hollow, and into that hollow, something else enters. Not immediately, not violently, but the way cold slips in through the smallest cracks. It does not need to be summoned. It only needs a door left open. At this stage, the thing that enters is not named, but it is understood that once the highest taboo is broken, the transformation has already begun, and winter, with all its cruel patience, will not miss its opportunity. There is a quiet belief that exists within the Algonquian spiritual world, rarely spoken aloud, that the Wendigo is not something born at the moment a human commits a crime, but something that has always existed, wandering through the cold, empty spaces of the world. It is not created by the act of cannibalism. That act merely opens a door. And the Wendigo, with the endless patience of winter itself, has always been standing on the other side. In its deepest nature, the Wendigo is not a creature of flesh and bone. It is a starving spirit, an entity formed from absence, an absence of warmth, an absence of connection, an absence of humanity. The Algonquian do not say that the Wendigo hunts the way animals hunt. It does not chase. It waits. It watches those who are slowly drifting away from the community, worn down by hunger, isolation, or greed, and it recognizes within them small but dangerous fractures, places where the cold can slip in without breaking anything at all. Not everyone hungry draws the Wendigo's attention. Not everyone alone becomes its victim. What makes a person vulnerable is the moment hunger is no longer shared, when fear is no longer spoken aloud, when someone begins to feel alone, even while surrounded by others. The Wendigo is drawn to that state the moment when a person no longer sees the community as an embrace, but as a collection of fading shapes, no longer fully real. Greed is another such doorway. Not a simple desire, but the instant someone begins to store, not for survival, but for fear of future lack, willing to let others starve so they may feel secure. In that moment, according to ancient belief, the human soul has already begun to grow cold. The earliest signs of the Wendigo rarely appear while a person is awake. They arrive in sleep when consciousness loosens, and the final barriers between the human world and the spirit world grow thin. The elders say there are dreams not created by the mind, but delivered. Among them, the most feared is known as the Black Moon Dream. The dream begins simply. The dreamer stands alone in the forest, snow rising to the knees, no wind, no sound. When they look up at the sky, the moon is still there, but it gives no light. It hangs overhead like a massive disk of coal, absorbing every trace of brightness around it. Under the black moon, the forest loses depth. Everything becomes flat, cold, and without escape. It is within this dream the Algonquian believe that the Wendigo enters, not with a clear shape, but as a sensation, a presence that thickens the air, leaving the dreamer to wake drenched in cold sweat, gripped by a fierce, unexplainable hunger. If the dream returns, it is taken as a warning, not of imminent death, but of transformation quietly underway. Some stories say the Wendigo does not come only through dreams. Sometimes it tests the threshold. One villager once told of a winter night as a blizzard approached when he heard 3 dry knocks against the door of his lodge. No one traveled at that hour, and the snow was already too deep for fresh tracks. The man did not open the door. He sat by the fire and listened. After some time, there were 3 more knocks, slower than before. And with each set of knocks, he noticed something strange. The snow outside the lodge grew deeper, as if time itself were moving faster only around his home. By the 3rd set, the fire went out without wind, and in the absolute silence that followed, he smelled something unfamiliar. A cold scent, unlike snow or ice, but like a place where life had never existed. By morning, long claw marks were found carved into the ground before the door, but no footprints were leading in or out. From that night on, the man never slept peacefully again. A few winters later, he left the village alone and walked into the forest, never to return. The Algonquians say that this cold scent is the surest sign of the Wendigo. It is its breath, not the stench of decay or blood, but the smell of absence of warmth, absence of life. Animals sense it before humans do. Hunting dogs growl and flatten their ears. Caribou flee without reason. Forest birds fall silent, as if the entire woodland holds its breath. When the cold scent appears, it is believed the Wendigo is very near, not in distance, but in spirit. It has noticed someone, and it is considered. The most frightening part of these stories is not the idea of the Wendigo attacking, but the way it waits for humans to walk toward it on their own. It does not force, it whispers, it suggests. It allows hunger to deepen and cold to sharpen just a little more each day. It lingers at the edge of awareness, like a shadow that grows longer as the fire begins to fade. When a person starts to accept thoughts they once would have rejected, thoughts of hoarding, of sacrificing others to survive, of breaking the highest taboo, then according to Algonquian belief, the Wendigo is no longer outside. It is already within. And once that spirit has found its place, winter no longer needs to act. Because from that moment on, the most terrifying cold no longer comes from the forest or the storm, but from the human heart itself. The change does not happen in a single night. The Algonquian say the Wendigo is never in a hurry. It allows the soul to adapt first, and only then does the body follow slowly, patiently, the way ice spreads across the surface of a lake until there is no space left for water to move. At first, those nearby notice only something subtle. The person who has been touched appears taller, not because the bones lengthen all at once, but because the posture changes, the back straightens, the neck extends forward, as if the body were being pulled upward by an invisible thread anchored somewhere in the winter sky. They stand motionless for too long, and when they stand beside others, their shadow on the snow seems longer than it should be. With time, the body begins to waste away unnaturally. This is not the thinness of ordinary hunger. Those who starve from lack of food still retain some softness in flesh and skin. With the Wendigo, it is as if something is feeding from within. The meat retracts, clinging tightly to the bones, revealing sharp angles as though the body itself is trying to escape its human shape. The skin turns a pale gray, drained of the warmth of blood stretched tight like animal hide, cured in freezing wind. Those who have touched it say it holds no warmth at all, even when the body has been standing near fire moments before. One of the most terrifying details described by the elders is the face. The lips of the Wendigo slowly disappear, not torn away like a wound, but drawn inward, shriveled, leaving yellowed teeth permanently exposed. Those teeth never fully close. They remain visible even when the mouth is still, as if the body has forgotten how to conceal its hunger. Some legends say The Wendigo chews away its own lips during its first bouts of starvation. Others claim it is the sign that the human soul has already been consumed. There is nothing left to hold the face in its familiar form. The most horrifying paradox is this: the more it eats, the hungrier it becomes. To the Algonquian, this is the unmistakable mark of the Wendigo. No meal ever satisfies it. No amount of flesh dulls the hunger. Each feeding only causes the body to grow taller, larger, while the emptiness inside deepens. The Wendigo does not eat to live. It eats because it cannot do otherwise. Its hunger does not rise from the stomach, but from the void left behind when the human soul was replaced. And because that soul no longer belongs to the human world, nothing within this world can ever fill it. Those who have seen a Wendigo from afar say they heard it before they saw it. Not a roar, not a scream, but a dry, hollow, clicking sound, like bones striking one another in the cold wind. The sound is uneven, a rhythmic echoing whenever the Wendigo moves, as if its body is no longer a seamless whole, but a temporary structure of bone and skin held together by a will that is not human. In the stillness of the northern forest, that clicking can travel far, blending with the sound of branches snapping under heavy snow, leaving the listener uncertain whether the forest itself has shifted or something else is drawing closer. The eyes of the Wendigo are among the few features said to carry light, not firelight, not the red of blood. The glow in its eyes is described as a faint blue pale and distant, like the aurora reflecting off ice. It does not illuminate. It seems instead to drain the light around it, deepening the hollows of the face and making it appear unreal. The Algonquian believe this is not the light of life, but the light of cold, the kind that exists only when everything else is dead or dying. The breath of the Wendigo is another mark survivors never forget, when it exhales the air before it freezes in an instant. Stories say that if you stand too close, you can feel your blood slow within your veins, as if the cold does not stop at the skin, but passes directly inside. Animals recoil from that breath. Hunting dogs whimper and lower their tails. Even fire is said to weaken in its presence, flames flickering low and unstable, mirroring a fear humans feel, but dare not name. In the oldest variations of the legend, there is mention of a colossal Wendigo that once wandered near a great frozen lake in the far north. It was said to be so tall that when it stood at the shore, its shadow covered the entire surface of the ice, darkening the water beneath, as though night had swallowed daylight. No one dared approach. Hunters who saw that shadow from afar turned back at once, and the lake itself never fully thawed, again in spring. The Algonquian believed this Wendigo was not born from a single broken taboo, but from greed accumulated across generations, a reminder that when imbalance endures too long, what emerges will exceed human control. What makes the stories of the Wendigo truly terrifying is not their form, but the remnants of humanity that remain. Sometimes, amid the taut gray skin, people glimpse a torn piece of a hunting shirt, a familiar strand of hair, or a fleeting gesture, a tilt of the head, a way of standing that hints at who the creature once was. These traces do not lessen the horror. They deepen it, because they remind us that the Wendigo does not come from elsewhere. It is made, slowly, through choices, through small decisions, through winter no one witnesses, and once the transformation is visible upon the body. The Algonquian believe the true battle is almost over. At this stage, the Wendigo no longer needs dreams or cold scents to hide itself. It has a shape, it has a body, and it has begun to walk openly in the human world, carrying with it a hunger that can never be satisfied and a cold that will never thaw. Amid all the distortions and horrors of the Wendigo, the Algonquian believe there is one place where the transformation can never be concealed. It is not found in flesh or bone, not in the eyes or the way it walks, but hidden deep within the chest, where the center of human life once resided. There, according to the elders, the heart no longer beats with blood. It has been replaced. The Wendigo carries a heart of ice. Not ordinary snow or frozen water, but a solid jagged core, as if carved from the first winter the world ever knew. This heart does not melt in common fire. It does not soften near human warmth. It is the crystallization of emptiness, of bottomless greed of the moment when the human soul is completely eroded. The Algonquians say that when the Wendigo breathes, it is this icy heart that draws warmth out of the air, making the atmosphere heavy and suffocating, as though winter itself were beating from inside its body. Because of this, the Wendigo is nearly impossible to kill by ordinary means. Arrows that pierce its flesh leave wounds that do not bleed. Axes striking bone produce a hollow, lifeless sound, like chopping dead wood. Even when the body collapses, the Algonquian believe the Wendigo is not yet dead. Its spirit does not dwell in breath or mind, but is anchored to the world by the frozen heart lodged within its chest. To end a Wendigo, that place must be destroyed, and it is never done in haste. According to ancient ritual, after the Wendigo's body has been brought down, often through the combined strength of the community or under the guidance of a shaman, it must be cut apart piece by piece. Not out of hatred, but to prevent the spirit from finding its way back. The chest is opened in absolute silence. No one speaks, no one weeps. When the heart of ice is revealed, people say the air turns suddenly colder, and those nearby can see their breath crystallize, even while standing beside a great fire. The heart is removed by bare hands or with tools prepared through ritual. It is heavier than expected, and so cold it can numb flesh within seconds. But removing it is not enough. The heart of ice must be destroyed completely, fragment by fragment, in a sacred fire kept burning until no trace of cold remains. The Algonquian believe that if even the smallest shard of ice survives, the Wendigo has not truly vanished. There is an old story told, in whispers even in daylight, of a shaman who failed to complete the ritual. In the tale, a Wendigo is slain after days of pursuit. Its heart of ice is taken and placed upon a great fire at the center of the village. The flames burn through the night, the ice slowly dissolving into thin vapor that rises into the air. But at dawn, when the fire dies down, the shaman realizes that a small shard of ice has slipped free, lost in the snow. They never find it. The following winter, a child is born in the village, weak, always cold, even when wrapped in thick furs. The child rarely cries, only stares into the darkness. As it grows, it is never full, and in its sleep, it makes a faint clicking sound. The people say the Wendigo did not die. It merely found a new body. Other stories tell that when the heart of ice is fully destroyed, the shadow of the Wendigo escapes, not as a clear creature, but as a sudden plume of freezing mist rising from the fire. Those who witness it say the vapor briefly takes the vague shape of a tall, gaunt figure before dissolving into the gray sky. In that moment, the wind surges, carrying a thin, tearing sound like a final breath, ripped apart by flame and light. This is believed to be the instant the Wendigo spirit is forced from the human world, not released, but erased. Yet not all regions believe the Wendigo has only one heart. In more remote northern lands, a darker variation persists. There it is said, the Wendigo has two hearts. The heart of ice lies in the chest, visible to all when the body is opened. But there is another, an extinguished heart of fire, buried deeper, bound to the last memories of the human it once was. This heart is neither cold nor warm. It is ash. And if this second heart is not recognized in the ritual, the Wendigo may be destroyed, but the curse it leaves behind endures, spreading like lingering cold through the community, recurring dreams, unexplained hunger children, born with eyes too old for their age. For this reason, the destruction of a Wendigo is never merely the killing of a creature. It is a purification, not only for the monster, but for the community that allowed the imbalance to persist long enough for it to form. Fire is not used only to melt ice. It is used to remind. That is when warmth between people fades. When a community no longer shares the weight of winter, a heart of ice will always find a place to grow. And when the final flames die down, the Algonquian believe the forest itself grows still for a moment, as if listening to determine whether the cold has truly gone, because the Wendigo does not come from the forest. It is what the forest reflects back when humans forget who they once were. When the sacred fire has burned down and cold ashes settles over the place where the heart of ice once existed, the community knows they are not truly safe, because before the Wendigo ever becomes a body that can be hunted, it is first and always a threat to the spirit. And in a world where spirits possess their own will, not everyone can see them, touch them, or speak to them. Only one kind of person is born or chosen to stand within that fragile boundary: the shaman. The Algonquian do not see the shaman as a healer in the ordinary sense. They are walkers of a narrow path between two worlds. On one side stands the community of the living. On the other lies the realm of spirits, where the Wendigo wanders in its purest form. Becoming a shaman is not a choice. It is a calling. Those who are chosen often carry the signs from an early age: strange illnesses that do not heal, recurring dreams of deep forests, or endless blizzards, moments of trance brought on by staring too long into fire. It is believed that in these moments, their soul has already learned how to leave the body, if only briefly. When suspicion arises that the Wendigo has begun to touch someone in the community, the shaman is sought first. Their role is not to accuse nor to punish. They diagnose. They listen to dreams, watch the eyes, observe how the afflicted reacts to fire, to food, to the sound of wind. There are signs only a shaman can see: cold that never leaves the body, even when seated close to flame, a gaze that lingers too long in darkness, or a silence that stretches unnaturally, as if the person were listening to a voice no one else can hear. When the danger is confirmed, the most powerful rite is performed: the shaking tent ceremony. A special lodge is built, small and narrow, like a temporary cage for the forces it is about to contain. The shaman crawls inside, often after allowing the community to bind their hands and feet, proving that what follows cannot be deception. As night falls and the fires outside the lodge are lowered, the shaman begins calling the names of their spirit guardians. Those who stand outside never see what happens within the tent. They only hear it. At first there are whispers, low and slow, like wind slipping through stone. Then come sounds that are not human: animal cries, snapping wood, muffled growls. Then the lodge begins to shake, gently at first, then violently, as if something inside is striking the walls, searching for a way out. The Algonquian believe that at this moment, the shaman is no longer inside the tent. Their soul has left the body and entered the world where the Wendigo exists. On these journeys, the shaman does not travel alone. They are guarded by companion spirits, the strongest of whom is known as the one who walks in smoke. Legend describes this being as a hazy figure, always shrouded in gray vapor, without a visible face or age. It speaks little, but always stands between the shaman and hostile spirits, like a moving wall. As the shaman ventures deeper into the Wendigo's domain, the one who walks in smoke moves ahead, leaving behind a faint scent of ash, guiding the way back. Those who survive the shaking tent say that when the shaman's soul leaves the body, their vision changes completely. They no longer see the forest as trees, but as interwoven currents of cold and heat. They see spirits as shifting shadows moving between trunks, and farther still, a vast emptiness, dark and immense, where the Wendigo exists not as a shape, but as hunger given form. Confronting it is not a battle of flesh, but of will. The Wendigo whispers, drawing forth the shaman's deepest fears, their weakest memories, trying to make them forget why they entered that world at all. Not every shaman returns. There is a somber story told as a warning of a young shaman who grew too confident in his power. When the Wendigo appeared near the village, he entered the shaking tent alone without calling all of his guardian spirits. That night, the lodge shook so violently that its stakes tore free from the ground. Screams echoed from within, not human, not animal. When the shaking stopped, dawn was near. The people opened the tent and found the shaman's body lying still. There were no wounds, no signs of struggle, but his flesh was frozen hard as ice. His face was eerily calm, as if the soul had departed and never returned. The Cree believe that in that spiritual battle, the Wendigo consumed the shaman's spirit, leaving behind an empty shell. Stories like this make the role of the shaman unbearably heavy. They are not merely healers or prophets. They are the final barrier between the community and the invisible hunger that waits beyond the firelight. Each time they enter the shaking tent, they know they may not return, or that if they do, they will carry fractures in the mind that never fully heal. But if no one dares step into that darkness, the Wendigo will no longer need to hide in dreams. It will walk openly, and when that happens, there will be no ritual left strong enough to stop it. When a shaman returns from the shaking tent with a conclusion that is terrifying, but not yet final, that the Wendigo spirit has only taken root, not fully possessed, the community understands they are standing at a last threshold. Beyond it lies an irreversible transformation. On this side stands a ritual so brutal that even those who perform it tremble. Yet it is the only chance to pull a human being back before the heart turns completely to ice. The ritual is not given a poetic name. It is remembered in stark, unadorned words, forcing heat-stuffing fat. The afflicted, the one suspected of being touched by the Wendigo, is laid at the center of the lodge, close to the fire, but never close enough to feel comfort. Before the ritual begins, the shaman draws a red circle around the body using glowing embers. This circle is not meant to imprison the human, but to bar other spirits from entering and to ensure that whatever is about to be expelled cannot latch onto anyone standing nearby. The Algonquian believe that in this moment the human body becomes an open battlefield, and even the smallest breach could allow the Wendigo to claim a new host. Animal fat, most often bear fat, or deer fat, is heated until it thickens, releasing a heavy greasy smell so overpowering it turns the stomach. This is not food, it is fire in liquid form. The shaman explains that the Wendigo is a spirit of cold and emptiness, and only something carrying the densest energy of life can oppose it. Hot fat represents stored abundance, the memory of summer, the warmth of days when the body believed the world could still sustain it. The afflicted rarely submits willingly. They shudder, turn their head away, lips blue eyes, wide with the panic of an animal cornered. But the ritual continues. The hot fat is forced into their mouth, spoon by spoon, despite retching, despite weak resistance. The Algonquian believe it is not the human who resists, but the Wendigo's spirit itself gripped by fear. It cannot endure heat. It despises fullness. It recoils from being forced to confront what it can never fully consume. In the stories passed down, there comes a moment when the hot fat reaches the stomach, and the afflicted suddenly vomits a plume of cold mist. Not smoke, not ordinary steam, but a pale gray vapor so cold it causes nearby flames to shudder. Shamans and witnesses say they hear something within that mist, a faint sound neither quite a hiss nor a breath before it dissolves into the air. This is believed to be the instant the Wendigo's spirit is driven out, forcibly torn from the place it was trying to claim. But the ritual does not always end in release. There is a sorrowful folk tale told in villages along the deep forest edge of a young man touched by the Wendigo after a winter of isolation. The shaman intervened in time, and the forcing heat ritual was performed. The cold mist appeared. The ravenous hunger faded. Warmth returned to the young man's body. Physically, he survived. But from that day forward, he never spoke another word. He ate. He worked. He looked at others with clear awareness, yet no sound ever left his mouth. When asked, the elders said his soul had returned, but it returned in silence. Perhaps some part of him followed the cold mist out and never fully came back. Those who have witnessed this ritual agree on one thing: it is not a miracle. It does not heal without cost. It is a violent intervention at the fragile boundary between body and soul, a desperate attempt to reverse what should never have begun. Even when successful, the person who is saved never truly becomes who they once were. Many develop an unnatural fear of cold, avoid fire, or wake in the night with a vague, nameless hunger that refuses to fade. Because of its cruelty, the forcing heat ritual is never performed lightly. It is used only when the shaman believes there is still a human being left to save when the heart of ice has not yet fully formed. Once the transformation has gone too far, when the eyes begin to reflect a pale aurora glow, and the clicking of bones carries on, the wind, hot fat, becomes nothing more than meaningless torture. When the ritual ends, the red circle of embers is erased and the ashes are scattered into the forest for the wind to carry away. The community remains silent. No one celebrates. For all to understand that the need for such a ritual is itself a sign that winter has already sunk too deeply into the human heart. And if the conditions that give rise to the Wendigo remain, if hunger, isolation, and greed persist, then the red circle will be drawn again someday. Not because the ritual failed, but because the world continues to test the limits of what it means to remain human. When the forcing heat ritual ends and the hunger does not recede, when the afflicted's eyes no longer reflect fire but only darkness, the community understands that there are no prayers left to send. The shaman does not speak this truth immediately. He remains silent for a long time, staring at the once human one, as if searching for a final sign of life still trapped within. But when the faint clicking sound emerges with every movement, when the breath carries that familiar cold scent that drives animals away from the area, the truth becomes impossible to deny. That person is no longer there. In the Algonquian world, this moment is considered the deepest tragedy a community can face. Not because they are about to hunt a monster, but because they are about to kill a relative, or more precisely, to destroy what is wearing the body of someone they loved. There is no rage, no rallying cries. The decision is made in silence because everyone understands this is not punishment. It is a painful duty meant to protect those who remain. A Wendigo hunt rarely takes place under favorable conditions. The Algonquian believe the Wendigo is strongest during blizzards, when the wind howls and tracks are erased almost as soon as they are made. Yet it is also during these storms that the creature is most likely to reveal itself. Hunger drives it to move, and the community led by the shaman enters the forest, in skin cut and cold, carrying torches, weapons, and ancient songs, not to inspire courage, but to keep the mind from unraveling under fear. In a storm, the Wendigo does not flee like an animal. It stands there tall and gaunt, its form dissolving into the white curtain of snow like a pillar of darkness driven into the earth. The wind carries the clicking of its bones across the forest, twisting all sense of direction. At times, the hunters believe they are pursuing it, only to realize they are circling their own terror. The shaman must constantly remind them to hold formation, never allowing anyone to become isolated, because the Wendigo does not require speed to kill. It needs only a moment of separation. When the Wendigo is finally brought down, often through the combined force of many, there is no cheering. There may be crying. There may be someone calling the creature by its old name, a final reflex of kinship. But the ritual does not pause. As the elders always remind them, killing the body has never been enough. The remains must be taken back, prepared for the final rite. Before the body is burned, the community sings funerary songs reserved for this moment alone. These songs are not meant to call a soul back, but to send it away. The verses speak the old name of the person who is lost, the good deeds they once performed, the bonds they once held within the village, affirming that this person existed, was loved, and should not be remembered only as a monster. The Algonquian believe that without these songs, whatever remains of the human soul could become trapped in the ashes, unable to move on. The task of tending the fire during the burning of a Wendigo is given to a single figure, most often a woman known as the fire keeper. This is not an honor, it is a burden. She must sit beside the flames for hours, sometimes days, without sleep, without looking away, ensuring the fire never dies. Legend says that if the flames falter even briefly, the heart of ice may reform, and the Wendigo could find its way back into the world. The firekeeper is forbidden to cry, for tears are believed to weaken the fire. Instead, she sings softly, repeating ancient phrases, both to remain awake and to remind the flames of their sacred task. In the firelight, some say they glimpse the twisted shadow of a tall, gaunt figure, writhing in the smoke as if struggling to escape before dissolving completely into the night. This is said to be the Wendigo's final moment in the human world. When the ritual ends, the ashes are scattered in many directions, carried away by the wind, ensuring that no part remains long enough to gather again. The community returns to the village in silence. There is no celebration, no sense of victory, only a fragile relief mixed with deep sorrow, because everyone knows the price paid was not merely a life, but peace of themselves. The Algonquian believe that each time a Wendigo must be executed, the community becomes poorer not in numbers, but in innocence. Once again, they learn that the boundary between human and monster is not drawn by shape, but by the choices made in the silence of winter. And though the fire has gone out, though the ashes have scattered, the fear remains. Because a Wendigo can be destroyed, but the conditions that give rise to it, hunger, isolation, and the breaking of community, can always return. When the men in black robes first set foot in the northern forests, they did not see a living world. To them, this was a barren land, silent, empty, untouched by the light of God. Cold was not a spirit, but punishment. Silence was not sacred, but a void where demons could hide. And when they heard stories of the Wendigo, they did not hear a warning about imbalance or greed. They saw living proof of Satan at work. The Jesuit missionaries wrote extensively. They filled journals sent back to Europe with detailed descriptions of Algonquian customs, beliefs, and fears. But everything they witnessed was filtered through the lens of Catholic theology. In these records, the Wendigo was no longer a spirit of hunger and winter. It became a demon, an evil entity that possessed human bodies akin to the devils of Scripture. Shamans were no longer guardians of balance, but sorcerers. The shaking tent was not a dialogue with spirits, but witchcraft. One fictionalized account written in the style of the Relation des Jésuites describes the experience of a young priest during his first winter in this land. He wrote that on a night of fierce wind, as snow struck the walls of his lodge like frozen fists, he awoke with the sensation of being watched. He reached outside, clutching his crucifix, and saw a shadow, unnaturally tall, standing just beyond the firelight. It did not approach. It did not retreat. It remained there through the entire night. At dawn, it vanished without leaving footprints. The priest wrote that he prayed until morning, convinced he had stood before a demonic temptation, a trial sent to test his faith. The missionaries soon learned that the northern forest was unlike any place they had known. By day, it seemed quiet. But when night fell, the sounds changed. Cries were echoing from far away. Neither wolf nor wind, but something like a strangled breath stretched through the cold air. Many priests wrote that these sounds plunged them into a silent panic because no prayer in their holy books seemed capable of filling the void those cries opened within them. It was not the fear of being attacked. It was the fear of not understanding what stood before them. That fear reached its peak in the story of a priest sent with a small mission group to overwinter near a native village. That winter came early and harsh. One morning, the priest left the lodge to pray in the forest. As was his daily habit, he did not return. When the others searched for him, they found a line of footprints, unnaturally large, pressed deep into the snow. Longer, wider, not quite human. The tracks did not run or wander. They moved straight into the forest, then ended abruptly in an open clearing, as if the one who made them had simply left the ground. Nobody was found. No signs of struggle. Only a silence heavier than before. In reports sent back to Europe, the incident was described as an attack by Satan, a warning of the dangers of an untamed land. But among the Algonquian, the story carried a different meaning. They did not see a battle between God and the devil. They saw a man who had entered a world without understanding its laws and was consumed by winter. Not because he was evil, but because he did not recognize that some things cannot be named using the language of another place. The conflict between these two ways of seeing was never resolved. The Jesuits attempted an exorcism with crucifixes and prayer. The native people performed purification with fire and hot fat. Both believed they were saving human souls, but they were not speaking the same spiritual language. And in the space between these belief systems, the Wendigo, whether called a spirit, a demon, or a mental illness, continued to exist, not because it was believed in, but because the conditions that give birth to it had not disappeared. The northern forest took no side. It did not distinguish between a crucifix and a charm. It only reflected the fear of those who entered it. And for many Jesuit missionaries, the Wendigo was not merely a devil in the woods. It was the first moment they realized that some darkness cannot be banished by the light they carried from home. Before the name Swift Runner became a fearful whisper on winter nights, he was once an ordinary man, respected, even admired. He was Cree, tall, strong, more familiar with the deep forest and frozen trails than most. He had worked for fur trading posts, guided police patrols and missionaries alike. A man standing between two worlds, the old world of the forest and the new one, slowly tightening its grip around indigenous tribes. To many, Swift Runner was proof that a person could survive change without losing themselves. But the final years of that decade were dark. The buffalo were gone. Food was scarce. Colonial policies choked off traditional lifeways, forcing many Cree families deeper into the forest, seeking survival in isolation. Swift Runner took his family, his wife, children, and relatives, far from the village to overwinter alone, believing his experience would be enough to carry them through one more cold season. It was not reckless in the usual sense, but it was a decision made in a world that was shrinking by the day. People living nearby later said that before Swift Runner left, there were nights of heavy snowfall when long, drawn-out cries echoed from the forest. No one could say whether it was wind or wild animals, but the sound was wrong, without rhythm, unlike wolves. It rose, then vanished, leaving behind a heavier silence. One neighbor recalled that the last night he saw Swift Runner, the man looked unusually exhausted, his eyes distracted as if listening to something beyond ordinary conversation. Winter came early. Snow fell thick and deep. The first weeks passed in silence. No word came from Swift Runner's winter camp. Then spring arrived. Others returned to the village, thin-worn but alive. Swift Runner did not. When he finally appeared alone, he said his family had died of hunger and illness. He spoke evenly. No tears, no anger, only emptiness. But something unsettled those who listened. He did not look like a man who had endured prolonged starvation. His body was not as wasted as expected, and his eyes were different, too deep, too still, as if he had traveled very far and returned carrying nothing back with him. When a rescue party and police were sent to the winter camp, the forest around it was unnaturally quiet. Near the site, tracks in the snow made them stop. There were human footprints, familiar enough, but mixed among them were impressions larger and longer, as if whoever made them walked with an unnatural stride. There were no signs of animals, no drag marks, only that disturbing mixture leading toward the lodge. The tracking dog with the party, an animal accustomed to the scent of death and wild game, suddenly stopped as it neared the shelter. It growled, lowered its tail, and then bolted, resisting the handler's pull. Those present later said that in that moment, they smelled a faint coldness in the air. Not rot, not decay, but the scent of a place where life does not exist. Inside the lodge, they found what history has since recorded: human bones, cooking vessels, and undeniable evidence of cannibalism. Yet what silenced them was not the site itself, but the strange order of the space, as though the acts had been carried out not in madness, but in a cold, deliberate calm. During questioning, Swift Runner did not deny what he had done. He spoke of the months of isolation in a voice disturbingly steady. He described hunger, not just in the stomach, but in the mind, in the chest, in broken sleep. He said he began having recurring dreams, a forest without moonlight, snow blindingly white, and a tall figure standing far away, not approaching, only watching. In the dreams, he heard voices, at first those of relatives, long dead, then whispers, without a source, telling him He would not die. That winter could last forever if he listened. He said there were nights he woke certain he heard footsteps circling the lodge, slow, heavy, even though the snow remained untouched by morning. He began avoiding the fire because within the flames he saw shapes that would not stay still. The hunger became strange. No amount of food ever satisfied it. And at some point, he said the boundary between loved ones and food blurred, not through hatred, but through an emptiness where emotion could no longer survive. When Swift Runner was tried under the laws of the settlers, his confession was recorded as evidence of a horrific crime. But to many Cree, his words sounded like a precise description of possession. He did not say he was a monster. He said he had been taken piece by piece until there was not enough left to stop what followed. Before his execution, he told a priest that death was the only thing capable of ending the hunger. To the Indigenous community who witnessed it, this was not a plea for forgiveness, but a final confirmation that the Wendigo had passed through their world, leaving behind a body and a winter that lingered longer than usual in memory. The Swift Runner case became a marker not only in legal history, but in collective fear. To authorities, it was an act of savage murder to be explained by law and order. To missionaries, proof of the devil's hand. But to those who understood the forest hunger and isolation, it was a familiar story told with a new name. A reminder that when the world is distorted enough that people no longer see one another as kin, the Wendigo does not need to come from anywhere at all. It only needs to wait. The trial of Swift Runner took place in a small, cold room where the laws of a new world were imposed upon a land still breathing to the older rhythm of forest and snow. The wooden walls failed to hold warmth. Breath was visible in the air, as if the room itself were listening. Swift Runner stood before the bench, with his hands bound, his expression so calm it unsettled those who had never known the forest. When questioned about his crimes, he did not deny them. He did not plead for mercy. He did not blame hunger or circumstance. He confessed to each act in an even voice, as though recounting the life of someone else. But when asked why Swift Runner lifted his head, met the eyes of those judging him, and spoke a sentence that froze the room, he said he had been possessed by the Wendigo. Not as a sudden madness, but as a slow occupation, day by day, dream by dream. To the court, it was the excuse of a murderer attempting to escape responsibility. To the clergy, it was evidence of demonic influence. But to the Cree who stood silently at the back, it was confirmation. Not justification, but the final description of a man who had walked the most feared path their people knew. Swift Runner did not claim innocence. He said he had been lost long before the crime occurred. The sentence was delivered swiftly. Hanging, a clean final punishment, consistent with the logic of colonial law. The execution was scheduled for a winter morning when snow lay thick on the ground and the sky hung low and gray, as if earth and sky alike refused to witness what was coming. That morning, the birds did not sing. The forest surrounding the settlement was unnaturally silent. Guards erected the gallows early, and as they moved across the frozen ground, the ice cracked beneath their boots, sharp and brittle, echoing like bones striking together. No one spoke it aloud, but many felt a nameless unease as though winter itself were pressing all of its cold into this single moment. Swift Runner was led outside. He walked slowly without resistance. When he exhaled, his breath did not form ordinary white vapor. It seemed darker, heavier, lingering before him, longer than it should, before dissolving. Some Cree whispered that this was no longer human breath, but something else slipping free piece by piece. As the rope was placed around his neck, Swift Runner turned his gaze toward the forest. Not toward the crowd, not toward the priests reciting prayers. He looked instead at the distant rows of pine trees, dark against the white snow, and he spoke his final words, not loudly, but clearly enough for those nearby to hear. He said the hunger had left him. He said the cold in his chest was melting. He said that if the Wendigo still existed, it was no longer inside him. His words did not sound like repentance. They sounded like a warning, vague and deeply unsettling. When the trapdoor fell, Swift Runner's body dropped. A brief, brutal instant ended a human life, but for the Cree, who witnessed it, the story did not end there. They said that immediately after the rope tightened, an unnatural gust of cold wind swept through, shaking the surrounding pines. And within that wind, some swore they heard a long, distorted scream, unmistakably not human, rising from the treetops, not from the gallows, from the forest. To the authorities, the execution affirmed the rule of law. To the church, it was the punishment of a lost soul. But to the Cree community, it was an incomplete ritual. There was no sacred fire, no firekeeper, no heart of ice cut out and burned away. Only a body buried in frozen ground, while whatever had possessed it may already have escaped, dissolving into forest wind and winter. After that day, people said the area around the gallows grew colder than usual. Snow melted more slowly in spring, and for many years, travelers passing through the nearby woods sometimes heard the wind moving through the pines with a familiar sound, like the ragged breathing of a hunger that could never be satisfied. Swift Runner was dead, but the question he left behind was never buried with him. If the Wendigo truly exists as a starving spirit, is the death of a single human enough to end it? Or is it only another moment where a body is destroyed, while the most terrifying thing continues to wander, nameless, shapeless, waiting for the next winter? As the 20th century cast its shadow over the northern forests, a new language followed. It was no longer the language of spirits or curses, but the language of diagnoses, symptoms, and medical files. Wendigo was for the first time pulled away from sacred fire and funeral songs and placed onto the operating table of modern science, and the new name given to it sounded no less cold than winter itself: Wendigo psychosis. In early 20th century medical and anthropological journals, Wendigo was no longer described as a starving spirit wandering the forest, but as a rare psychiatric syndrome emerging within communities exposed to extreme hunger, prolonged isolation, and relentless cold. Physicians and researchers argued that under such conditions, the human mind could fracture in very specific ways. Fear embedded itself deep in the subconscious. Folklore supplied that fear with a recognizable form, and the result was a mental state in which individuals believed they were becoming a Wendigo, or were being possessed by an entity like it. Under this interpretation, Wendigo ceased to be the cause and became the consequence, a product of collective psychology, a cultural framework designed to explain something unbearable, the emergence of cannibalistic desire under desperate circumstances. Science, confident in its methods, believed it had found the answer. Yet even within the driest reports, there were details that forced readers to linger longer than expected. One mid-century case study, fictional, but built upon real patterns, described an Indigenous man who survived months of isolation in an abandoned northern mining outpost. When brought to a hospital, he had not killed anyone and had not eaten human flesh, yet he complained obsessively of an unexplainable hunger. He said food had no taste, that fire made him uneasy, and that at night he heard the wind calling his name. Doctors diagnosed severe malnutrition combined with trauma-induced psychosis, but one detail caused the file to be flagged whenever heavy snow fell. Outside the hospital windows, his heart rate dropped abnormally, and his skin temperature fell below physiologically acceptable levels, even though all other vital signs remained stable. A psychiatrist involved in the case kept private notes that were never formally published. In them, he wrote that he began to dream of snow. At first, the dreams were fragmented, but over time, they became vivid: a white forest with no paths and a hunger unrelated to the body. He wrote that upon waking, he needed several seconds to convince himself he was still in a warm room and no out there in the cold. He reminded himself that this was pathological empathy, a psychological effect caused by prolonged exposure to a patient. But in the final line of his notebook, he wrote a sentence without explanation: "There are nights when I fear that what is being diagnosed does not exist only within the patient." 20th century anthropology attempted to frame Wendigo as a culture-bound syndrome. According to this view, mental illness is universal, but its expression is shaped by cultural beliefs and narratives. Elsewhere, a person might believe they are possessed by demons or transforming into a wolf. In the northern forests, they believe they are becoming Wendigo. This explanation was elegant, coherent, and seemed to close the case. Yet even in academic conferences, certain questions refused to fade. Why were the dreams so similar even among individuals who had never heard detailed Wendigo stories? Why did symptoms intensify during winter and ease with the arrival of spring even when nutrition improved? And why, in rare cases, did patients describe a deep, localized cold within the chest at a precise point before dangerous behaviors emerged? Science could measure stress, hormones, scan brain activity, and map survival mechanisms distorted by extreme pressure. But there were things it could not measure meaning. To the Algonquian peoples, Wendigo was not merely a pathology, but a moral warning, a spiritual map, showing what happens when community collapses and humans are driven into absolute isolation. When science removed Wendigo from that context, it explained how the mind breaks, but missed why this story refuses to disappear. By the late 20th century, the term Wendigo psychosis had gradually vanished from textbooks. New cases became so rare that many concluded the syndrome never truly existed or had been exaggerated by colonial misunderstanding. But the disappearance of a term does not mean the disappearance of the fear it attempted to name. Wendigo, under scientific scrutiny, may have been deconstructed. Yet in dreams, in oral histories, and in the hollow emptiness of modern societies that no longer share their burdens, its shadow remains. Science placed the Wendigo on the operating table and declared it not a spirit. But the question the 20th century left behind was no less chilling. If Wendigo is only a product of the human mind, then what in this world continues to create it again and again? When 20th century science quietly closed the file labeled Wendigo psychosis, it seemed at first glance that the story of the starving spirit of the northern forest had reached its end. But Wendigo did not disappear. It merely left the realm of living belief and stepped into another space larger, less restrained, and dangerous in a new way. Wendigo entered literature and popular culture, where it was no longer bound by ritual community or taboo, but endlessly reshaped by the imagination of the modern world. The most significant turning point in this transformation came in 1910, when Algernon Blackwood published the short story, The Wendigo. In Blackwood's version, the Wendigo was no longer the consequence of a moral transgression. It was not born from hunger or personal sin. Instead, Blackwood recast Wendigo as a primordial force of nature, an ancient wind spirit, vast and pre-human. It did not need to possess anyone. It hunted directly. It did not teach moral lessons. It simply revealed the absolute smallness of humanity before a wilderness that did not care whether humans lived or died. Here, Wendigo ceased to be an internal warning and became a form of cosmic horror fear, arising not from human weakness, but from nature's terrifying indifference. That shift opened the path for H.P. Lovecraft and the later circle of weird fiction writers. In Lovecraft's universe, Wendigo, under other names, was no longer tied to a specific winter or northern forest. It became part of an ancient non-human cosmos in which humanity was a minor accident. Wendigo was no longer hungry for food. It was hungry because its very mode of existence was incompatible with human life. Hunger moved from the biological into the metaphysical. Popular culture, however, did not stop there. As the 21st century began, Wendigo was reborn in video games, films, and graphic novels. One of the most prominent milestones was Until Dawn, where Wendigo returned closer to its Algonquian roots, humans trapped by isolation, forced into cannibalism to survive, and transformed as a result. Yet its form had changed completely. It was no longer the gaunt giant of legend. nor the wind spirit of Blackwood. The Wendigo of Until Dawn was a perfect predator, fast feral, almost insect-like, an embodiment of pure survival terror. Then came perhaps the most controversial mutation of all the deer-headed Wendigo. In traditional Algonquian belief, a Wendigo does not have the head of a deer. It remains disturbingly human, and that is precisely what makes it terrifying. Yet in modern art, the image of Wendigo crowned with a deer's skull and massive antlers has become an obsessive motif. Why art critics suggest that the deer head perfectly symbolizes the reversal between hunter and hunted. The deer is humanity's ancient prey. When Wendigo wears its skull, the roles invert. What was once hunted now hunts. Antlers within Gothic visual language also signal corrupted sanctity, a fallen forest god, a twisted form of the sacred. The influence of modern Gothic aesthetics, with their fixation on death, bone-dark forests, and decay, has transformed Wendigo into a powerful visual symbol instantly recognizable. It no longer requires a complex backstory. A tall skeletal figure with antlers silhouetted against white snow is enough to trigger fear. Wendigo has been simplified, but also universalized. When comparing its variants, modern Wendigo exists in at least 3 dominant forms. The first is the hunter Wendigo, a physical creature that stalks humans in the forest, common in films and games. The second is the wind spirit Wendigo, immaterial supernatural closer to Blackwood's vision, representing humanity's insignificance before nature. The third and oldest, yet least deeply explored in popular culture, is the starving demon Wendigo. Not a creature, but a state of being and internal transformation that occurs when moral boundaries collapse. Notably, the deeper Wendigo moves into popular culture, the more externalized it becomes. It is something you encounter, fight, and destroy. No longer something you might become. The personal horror that anyone could slip into hunger and lose their humanity has been replaced by a safer, more distant fear designed for consumption. Wendigo becomes a monster, no longer a mirror. Yet this transformation reveals something crucial. Despite its altered forms, despite being severed from its original cultural context, Wendigo has never vanished from the collective imagination. It simply adapts to the fear of each era. When humanity fears nature, the Wendigo becomes a wind spirit. When it fears moral collapse, Wendigo becomes a cannibal. When it fears becoming the predator in a scarce world, Wendigo wears antlers and empty eyes. At its deepest level, regardless of form, Wendigo always carries the same hunger. Not always hunger for flesh. Sometimes hunger for power, for resources, for experience, for endless consumption. Popular culture may make Wendigo more beautiful, more violent, or more alien, but it cannot erase its origin, the fear that there is a point beyond which humans no longer recognize themselves, and transformation begins. Wendigo has left the forest and entered book screens and games, but perhaps, as the old stories once warned, it never truly left humanity at all. In the language of some contemporary Indigenous thinkers, Wendigo carries another name, a name no longer reserved for a spirit wandering frozen forests, but for a sickness of thought itself. They call it Wetiko, not a monster with a physical form, but a mental condition, a hunger that has escaped the individual body and spread across society, embedding itself into systems, laws, and what the modern world calls normal. Wetiko is the disease of endless greed. It is the moment when life is seen as a resource community, as a tool in the natural world reduced to something meant to be consumed. It is Wendigo that has left the forest, shed its gaunt shape, and dressed itself in new garments, progress, growth, efficiency. There is no longer the sound of bones clicking in the wind, no tall shadows standing silently in the snow. Instead, there are rising graphs, cities glowing through the night, and a hunger disguised in the language of reason. There is a quiet indigenous parable rarely told to crowds about the man from the shadowless city. He comes from a place without forests, without winter, yet carries a strange hunger with him. Wherever he walks, light seems to be absorbed by glass walls. Buildings grow taller, Land is divided and then disappears behind signed papers. People continue to live around him, continue to work, continue to consume, but slowly no one can see their own shadow on the ground anymore. When the man from the shadowless city leaves, the light does not return, the land does not recover, and those who remain can no longer remember how they lived before they learned how to hunger. Seen through this lens, modern cities begin to resemble new forests. There are no pine trees, but dense towers of concrete. No snow, but isolation. No Wendigo standing in the darkness, but systems that never know enough, always demanding more time, more energy, more attention. This is where Wetiko resides. It does not need Black Moon dreams. It does not need an exposed heart of ice. It only needs a world that believes infinite growth within a finite space is natural. Looking back at the entire journey of Wendigo, from winter, spirit, forest, demon of hunger, to psychiatric diagnosis, to cultural symbol, one truth remains unchanged. Wendigo was never only a story about cannibalism. It is a story about the breaking point of humanity. The moment we stop seeing each other as kin. The moment the community is replaced by advantage. The moment hunger stops being a temporary trial and becomes a governing principle. In a world of glass and steel, humans no longer hear wind cutting through pine branches, but are surrounded by other sounds, the hum of machines, the pulse of notifications, the constant whisper, demanding more, faster, stronger. And beneath it all, an image quietly persists. Modern humans carrying hearts of ice inside cages of glass and steel. These hearts do not freeze because of winter, but because of emptiness masked as consumption. They no longer remember warmth because they have forgotten what it feels like to be warmed by one another. Perhaps that is why the story of Wendigo has never truly ended, not because we fear getting lost in frozen forests, but because the forest has changed shape. It now lives in how we live, how we consume, and how we remain silent before our own hunger. Each person listening to this story may see a different Wendigo in history, in society, or within themselves. If you've made it this far, you may find yourself wondering, what does the Wendigo of our time look like in the world we inhabit today? Is it merely an old legend, or a mirror still reflecting something uncomfortably clear? These questions don't demand immediate answers, but they deserve to be spoken, shared, and held, so that silence does not become fertile ground for hunger to keep growing. Stories like Wendigo exist not to be believed blindly, but to be listened to and questioned. If this journey has stirred a thought, a doubt, or a feeling you can't quite name, leave your mark like footprints in snow, so others know they are not listening alone. And if you wish to keep walking deeper into forgotten, darker stories, where myth, history, and the human mind intersect, stay with us. Follow along and take the next step, because Wendigo, as the old stories warned, never truly disappears. It only retreats into shadow, waiting to be named again. And sometimes listening and returning is the only way to keep that hunger from speaking by itself.